Welcome. A very warm greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us again for another Pariyatti Presents event. My name is Brihal Sarathi, and I'm here on behalf of Pariyatti as its Executive Director. We're grateful that you've all joined us today. For those of you who are not already familiar with Pariyatti, we're a non-profit charitable organization based in the USA. Our mission is to enrich the world by disseminating the words of the Buddha, providing sustenance for the seeker's journey, and illuminating the meditator's path. Pariyatti imports books from around the world, reprints books, publishes new titles, and converts existing material to digital formats. We protect and provide an enormous catalog of Dhamma resources in many languages and formats that otherwise would not be as easily available. We also offer many free resources, such as the Pariyatti Learning Center, the Treasures of Pariyatti, Dhamma Storytime, and the Daily Words for Inspiration via email, RSS feeds, and our mobile app. We offer most audio and video material, as well as many eBooks and audiobooks free of charge, including a large number of resources for students of SN Goenka. We organize donation-based residential Pāli workshops and facilitate pilgrimages for Vipassana meditators. For more information about Pariyatti, please visit our website at pariyatti.org. So for today's event, Marta Van Patten will be interviewing Ian Hetherington. Ian Hetherington, after obtaining his BSc in Social Sciences and a postgraduate teacher's certificate, worked for more than 20 years in the British Public Education Service as a secondary school teacher, advisor, and inspector. Now retired, he conducts Vipassana meditation courses and assists with publicity and volunteer support activities for Vipassana organizations in Europe. Mr. Hetherington has been associated with a number of Vipassana projects, including as a co-organizer and contributor to international conferences in India and France, and as an advisor to 3 films. He's also co-edited books for the Vipassana Research Institute of India, including Chronicles of Dhamma, Dharma, Its True Nature, and the Vipassana Pagoda Souvenir of 1997. Realizing Change was his first book, and it's been published separately in both India and the USA, and it's currently being translated into German and French. Today, Ian will be interviewed by Marta Van Patten. Marta is a documentary filmmaker and a Vipassana teacher in the tradition of SN Goenka. So without further ado, I give you Ian and Marta.
Hi, Ian. It's nice to see you.
And you, Marta.
I see we're wearing matching sweaters.
Yeah.
It was so nice to reread Realizing Change. It's such a down-to-earth book, and it's full of little bite-sized pieces of wisdom. And it also has some beautiful, longer stories that I found myself wanting to continue. I was wishing these people would write a full-length book. Some of them are such beautiful stories. And it tackles this topic of actual transformation and change, which isn't so easy to talk about because we change slowly with Vipassana. It's kind of like water running down a stream and slowly transforming a rock and smoothing out our jagged edges. And sometimes it's hard to see, but what I found so beautiful was that you can see from these stories that we do change. We slowly change. Some people have more dramatic realizations, and some people it happens more slowly. And it's such a diverse book full of different stories. So I wondered if you could just, tell us a little bit of how this book came to be and why did you write it?
I think the seed for this book, the seeds lie in different places. On the one hand, in my professional life as a school teacher and then as an advisor to school teachers, I'd become a serial anthologist. So when I was a school teacher, I liked to collect some of the writing of the students and publish so that they could take away things that they had written and their classmates had written and enjoy and share with their families. And then later, when my target group was no longer school students but teachers, occasionally we'd take them away for creative writing weekends out in the country or by the sea, and so that they could actually share some of their concerns and reconnect with writing also, since they were English teachers, so deeply interested professionally in literature. But how about you? You can do this too. And of course, some of them were doing it anyway, whether it was just privately in journals and diaries, or whether, they were writing poetry or stories or journalism or whatever it was. So that was the, I had a personal history there. I mean, I've been writing poetry since my teens, when I should have been listening to dry lectures. I wasn't. From a Dhamma point of view, the seed really was in some projects that I got involved with doing long-term service in India. So 94, 95, I was privileged to be there for 6 months. And I got asked to help organize a conference for Goenkaji about Dhamma, its true nature, at Dhammagiri. And that was unusual in the sense that usually those conferences were for meditators. But this was actually for the public. Goenkaji had in mind all sorts of people from around India who he wanted to come. He wanted them to hear for themselves what this was. And so as a result of that conference and editing the book that came out of it with a couple of other ATs, I was getting a sense of the power of the voice from the other side. The principal teacher, takes care of the teaching. But I was getting interested in the voice coming from the other side. And of course, I was familiar with that for being an assistant teacher. You hear those stories when you're conducting courses, and they're very moving. And you mentioned, Marta, just a moment ago about how people change. We have the privilege as assistant teachers of seeing people change in 10 days. Remarkable changes. And then sometimes we stay in touch with that person and we see it, amplified. We're talking now about 1997, 98. So in those days, the international meetings at Dhammagiri were very well attended. And that year, Bill Hart and Rick Crutcher were both there in person. And we had a bit of a correspondence about this project. And they thought it had some legs, as we would say. So I went to see Goenkaji and put it to him. I had to have his blessing, obviously. This was a huge thing. Nothing like this had been tried before. And he gave the project his blessing. He knew that I had the backing of very senior people also to guide me. And then in those days also, so we could speak to this conference and say, well, the conference was well aware that Goenkaji had some wonderful projects in the pipeline. This is 1997. So to honor Sayaji U Kin and his birth anniversary, we had the Global Pagoda, we had Dhamma Tapovana, a long course center alongside Dhammagiri. We had the village for meditators, Sayaji U Kin village, and others. So this book also is in a way part of that gratitude. But of course, it slipped the timescale because in the end, it took 5 years to complete and wasn't finished till 2003.
So how did people get you the material? Were they using email? Were they sending you handwritten? Were they sending you typewritten? How were you collecting it? Because 1997. Email was pretty new at that time.
It was very new. Yeah. So some people. So I had so much help from different people. One of the greatest helps was Dhammadeepa in the UK. I live now, and I used to live quite close, fortunately. And I spoke to the centre teachers, and I got their agreement that I could use that as a postal address. Mm-hmm. And also the staff there, like centre manager and others, they were briefed that stuff would come in. And even you might get phone calls, and they sort of relay the information to me. So this was fantastic. And when I got technical problems, as you say, computer technology and all that was quite new. I got into, tangles, and, I needed lots of stuff printing off or whatever, or even transcribing. I got wonderful help, for instance, from Karuna Films.
Hmm.
They had a lot of interview footage that they were probably never going to use. So they generously said, well, why don't you get this transcribed? And, that shows up in the book. It was a wonderful resource. It came from the internet, it came from that, it came from Goenkaji's personal archive. We could research as well. So a lot of, in that 5 years, particularly the first 6 months, I was spending a lot of time not only constructing a network to support this, but also digging into everything that had been written in our organization about Vipassana, research studies from different places, etc., etc.
Okay. So in Goenkaji's personal archive, he had some of these testimonials.
Yes.
Okay, lovely. And what about the photographs? They're beautiful accompaniment to the stories. How did those come about? Are they all by one person, or are they?
No, they were by two people, both local meditators here in UK. Kurt Brown, who's a centre teacher here in UK, a very enthusiastic photographer, and kindly showed me a whole bunch of his work. And then Michael Green, who ran a book service, Vipassana book service here.
And how did you, so you must have had trouble choosing the stories. Did you have to really narrow down, or how did you know, how did you choose, and how did you know when the book was done, when you had enough stories?
Yeah, I asked my editor about that early on, and he said, you'll know. And it's true, I wasn't ready to sign the book off until 5 years done. There were things in there that needed to be said well, and I wasn't at a stage where I could say them in a way that would satisfy me. So it did take that long. What you see in the book is only a sample. So not everything got in, and then only bits of longer pieces got in. It really was a matter of really knowing those pieces so well that I knew what could fit where.
Yeah, it has a nice order to it. There's certain categories that you've done, before the course, during the course, after the course, and then there's bigger sections, children's course, prison courses, and then there's the beautiful sections at the end.
There's a bit in the middle, along the path, or on the path it is, isn't it? The idea for that was, here are longer, more holistic accounts that I didn't want to break up, and I didn't want to categorize, but there was a roundedness somehow, even if they were short. There were some that were quite lengthy, and there were some that were short, but they were very, very rounded and just stood on their own. They said it in totality, which was, initially I hadn't thought about that. And then I thought, yes, well, let's break up these two, the course-based stuff and the stuff about applications. Because, as many people have said, this is what Vipassana is. It's a path for life. So let's get a feeling for that wholeness. That's what that chapter was about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, because there's the course, and then there's, how do we take it into our lives?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm wondering if we can start now by reading a few things, and then we can talk about it further.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very tender reflections where people are very brave and talk very honestly about something that is very difficult, and how they were searching for something. And in this particular one, it's Ben Turner's story, and he has this beautiful section where he talks about the criteria he wrote for finding a teacher. So I wonder if you could read this on page 14 to 15. Starts with, "It was my great good fortune."
It was my great good fortune to have been born deeply depressed. My earliest memories are of feeling alone, outcast from other children, sad. In school, for a time I was thought to be developmentally delayed or retarded, as the term was in those days. As I grew older, I became even less functional in life, having few friends, spending most of my time alone, being required to repeat 7th grade. As I entered my teens and on into my early adulthood, feelings of worthlessness increased, and thoughts of suicide plagued me frequently. I sought the help of a long series of psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, and social workers. They were of little help. I was always aware of feeling squeezed into some sort of box constructed of one theory or another. Often, I felt the therapist's ego so strongly intruding into the process that I felt I'd become lost in either their own grandiosity or their self-doubt. At this point, in my early 20s, I felt I'd reached the end of my rope. Nothing that our mental health professionals could offer seemed to help. I realized that if I was to get to the bottom of my misery, I'd have to find the answer myself. I began to wonder about spiritual and religious practices. After all, if so many billions of people all around the world were involved, there must be some benefit and some common experience. I began reading from Christianity, Taoism, Vedanta, Confucianism, Zen, Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, and multiple New Age sources. Eventually, I tried various practices. I had some hope that perhaps here lay a solution. There seemed to be some common core of truth, but in practice, I could not find it. It all seemed buried in layers of ritual, imagery, financial entanglements, and even immorality on the part of students and an occasional teacher. The seed of hope remained, however, and I gradually developed 4 rules of thumb to help me in my search. 1. The practice had to be free. If there is knowledge that leads to happiness and freedom, anyone who'd found it, anyone who was teaching it, would have to want everyone to share it and would have no use for making a profit from it, while withholding it from those who could not pay. 2. There had to be no leap of faith required, no invisible God, no blind worship. Each step must be clear and acceptable from the start. 3. There could be no exclusion of anyone and no damnation of those who were of a different path. 4. The teacher must be following his own teaching and must be free from the taints of immoral action. These criteria very much sped up my search, but eliminated virtually everything that I'd come into contact with so far. I was practicing in a rather eclectic, diluted school of Buddhism when I finally met someone who'd taken a course of Vipassana in India. After I took my first course with Mr. Goenka, I knew I'd found the tool that met all my 4 criteria for a pure practice. There were no miracles, but I found that course after course, year after year, my lifelong depression became manageable. More precisely, I became less reactive to the suffering that is the nature of life. Of course, dark moods still come, but they're more like watching a cloud pass in front of the sun than like being buried in a mudslide. That's Ben Turner from the US.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, it's amazing that he wrote those 4 rules of thumb before he found the course, and how well they describe, this tradition. It's quite amazing. I mean, one of the lines I really love in this piece by Ben is that he says the teacher must be following his own teaching and must be free from the taints of immoral action. Yeah. I'm wondering, how did you all, when you all met Goenkaji, when you sat courses with him and then started serving, How did he demonstrate that to all of you? How did you know that to be true?
Well, I had there are several answers to that come to mind. One is that I sat self courses with him later in his life. He would take an annual self course of maybe a month at a time, and I had the opportunity to sit with him. So, meditation was obviously, personally very, very important to him, and he practiced. There is a division between, people who teach and don't practice, and those who do practice. As far as Goenkaji is concerned, I think the way that manifested most clearly was his metta and his compassion, just massive. I saw it in action so many times.
Right. The last line of this passage also, he says, of course, dark moods still come, but they are more like watching a cloud pass in front of the sun than like being buried in a mudslide. I just find this really helpful because I think sometimes when we talk about how Vipassana affects us, sometimes we get a little grandiose about it, that, oh yeah, there are sometimes the way it's presented in that it is a cure-all and it happens very quickly, but it doesn't always happen very quickly. And it, for some, it can take a long time. And you write about this a bit later in the book, also in the prison section, about how setbacks do come. And, and our progress depends on us as individuals, and everyone's different. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about this from your own perspective.
Yes, it's not a linear progression. It was so used to setting targets and, operating in that mode. And Vipassana is a different mode. Dhamma is a different mode. You have to be open to other things coming in. And it matters also in terms of measuring your progress. Two things come to mind. One is, are you practicing every day? Are you getting that yearly course? But the other one is, are you measuring your progress by the type of sensation you're feeling, or by the equanimity towards whatever's coming when you sit on the cushion? Are you measuring it by being kinder, by not getting so upset with things, by being less attached to your own ideas? Is the ego coming down? These things are important.
There's actually the next section I'm hoping to read talks about this a bit. It's on page 48, and it's just a beautiful section talking about too much effort. And it starts with on the 5th or 6th day by Tanda Win.
On the 5th or 6th day of the course, my awareness of sensations penetrated inside the body. The teacher was very kind to interview me every day and solve my difficulties through these discussions. On the 6th night, I could barely get to sleep. And the next day, when I met him, my teacher said, Tanda, you always say, I had to, a lot. Do you think you're the one doing all things yourself? I answered, Sir, I still think the mind is my mind, and my mind is making everything happen. He replied, to practice Dhamma, effort should be put at minimum. Try reducing the effort you put in. From that time on, I tried to observe my way of meditation. Putting too much effort into my working, too much I will do, I am doing. Big I. I saw I was identifying with the sensations. Finally, sitting with no effort, I realized that sensations come naturally and go naturally. They come and go not because I am doing something, but because of their nature. At the same time, I could see myself, how proud, how self-centered, how selfish I was. These experiences were things I'll not forget for my whole life. That's Tanda Win from Myanmar.
Yeah, it's beautiful. learning this takes time, the right amount of effort. There's that beautiful analogy about the Buddha describing this by using a knife and cutting just the surface of the lotus leaf, but not piercing through. And there's so many analogies Goenkaji tells on our courses. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this. Not too little, not too much. How did you learn this? How do you continue to learn this? Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's something that comes up on courses with students quite a bit. It's something that sitting longer courses, where you're working more independently for longer periods of time, it's very important to get the balance right. The mind will always, whether you're a newcomer or you've been practicing for years, the mind will play tricks on you. You're being lazy, that negative voice will creep in. You're not putting enough effort in, or you'll be agitating about some goal. Some goal will creep in. Yeah, my concentration's not good enough. Should work more on concentration.
Yeah, it's a delicate process, and I think it takes time to learn that. And sometimes I feel like we have to learn by going too far. we were riding the bike, we fall in one direction, and then we fall in the other. We have to do that, go through that in order to learn what the middle path really is.
Absolutely. So one of my lessons was my first long course. As I sat in Aditan all the time. How many times have you heard that? Somebody sitting their second course. But I'm ashamed to say that was my first 30-day course.
Wow.
And all the way along until I think the last day, when suddenly the scales fell from my eyes. And I thought, this is crazy. What's he doing? I just had to give up. Stop this madness. You're right. We do have to learn lessons. A good Dhamma friend says, talks about Vipassana in terms of relearning. We have to recondition ourselves, actually. It's a very deep thing. And it's difficult. And I think that's why Goenkaji says, this is certainly going to be a lifetime process, and maybe, a few more lifetimes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
But,
so
what's nice is, we've got the joy of progressing in this life. Not only just according to one's own measures, but also in, the happiness that, or the contentment that one can feel oneself without being complacent, but also the capacity to give, enlarging. And that's very satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense that even if we make some mistake, or we can always go and we can always serve. And sometimes for me, that helps me kind of gain the perspective again, be more compassionate for myself, understand this is a process, be more patient.
So there's another really important thing. I think it comes up a lot in courses. We don't, metta is not well understood often, and certainly metta for oneself. With all one's mistakes and impurities, that surface in ugly ways, particularly, this anusaya kalesha, the unexpected volcanic explosion that comes from nowhere. And you just, see it for what it is and forgive yourself and move on. Yeah.
Well, that's
there's always somebody to confess to as well, isn't there? If you're lucky enough to have, Dhamma friends or a Dhamma partner, you can always say, I messed up there.
Yeah, good friends on the path.
Yeah.
So that's a nice segue into the next section I'm hoping you can read, which is actually about the practice of metta. It's on page 51, and it's by Charles Brown, and it starts with on the morning of the 10th day.
So this is from the chapter about during the course. The one thing about which is perhaps important to put in as a context, writing this book, of course, there was always the potential danger that somebody would use it as a do-it-yourself manual instead of coming on the course. So there's an important caution early on that this is not how this should be used. Yeah, this is an account of the course, but you have to go to the course for 10 days, residential, to live the experience of this. And then you'll know what it is and you'll get the benefit. On the morning of the 10th day, a new type of practice is taught, the meditation of loving kindness, or metta bhavana in Pāli. The final part of Vipassana has a different focus and uses an altogether different technique. For Vipassana, it's essential to maintain one's attention on the sensations within the framework of the body to carry out the work of self-purification. However, to practice metta, the sharing of all one has gained with others. One deliberately fills these same sensations with feelings of goodwill and compassion, which radiate throughout the body and into the atmosphere beyond. Having first worked to purify oneself, sending vibrations of harmony and selfless love to others is an integral part of the meditation practice, producing powerful positive effects. From now on, as they approach the end of the course and prepare to reconnect with the world outside, the meditators will practice a few minutes of metta after every sitting of Vipassana. So here's one meditator's experience. Later, I again began to feel awash in the ecstatic feeling. Instead of pulsing through, the feeling persisted in my body. In fact, it seemed to be what my body was made of. The immediate environment seemed essentially identical. Into this environment, I felt the arrival of my parents. They had died about 6 months apart, approximately 10 years earlier. Now they were back with me in a realistic and very powerful way. I loved them in a whole and healing manner. I felt that everything in our past together was just as it should have been, and that everything was complete. This brought a sense of final closure with any dissatisfaction I had ever had, and a new flow of love for them. By now, the feeling of love and the sensation of ecstasy had become intertwined. They seemed to be as one. And then another new aspect of this ecstasy began to assert itself. Before this, I had seemed to be the passive recipient. Now I came to feel that I produced it from somewhere within me. I flooded my parents with it and then began to produce it in ever greater quantity until it began to flow upward out of me. This flow went straight upward until it encountered a substantial blanket of similar material which encapsulated the whole globe. That which I produced turned rather abruptly when it encountered the blanket and flowed along within it, fully integrated, yet maintaining its distinct identity. It flowed laterally towards some unknown destination, and then it turned abruptly downward. Its destination was my ex-wife and my brother, both located in Seattle. These were the two living people with whom love and problems created a strong response in my life. Now I was pouring love into them. As with my parents, there was now only love in great abundance. Ultimately, the strongest part of the experience was not with any of the 4 people it involved, but rather with the thick blanket of love which I felt to be encompassing the earth.
It's an amazing story, and it's such a dramatic description of the practice of metta, and of course how it's not that it happens to everyone this way, but just it's a beautiful description of how it just started pouring out of him, and how it, especially towards those that he had difficulty with, which is, really beautiful. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your own experience with metta, your father, and your own experience of practicing metta in your daily life.
I find I'm giving more time to sending metta at the end of my sittings these days. I see more suffering, and I try to keep the practice of metta relevant and alive to what is happening around me, whether it's, family and friends, or whether it's in sort of global circumstances. Goenkaji says of metta that it doesn't stay static; it grows. People will be affected by metta if they are sensitive enough to feel it, but in other respects, it strengthens the sender. So I've certainly found that. I also feel, from my own experience and also talking to others, that this supposed division between those who are living and those who've passed away, it's not an important separation as far as metta is concerned. And I think that can be a great consolation to people who are, grieving for loved ones. And I've heard Goenkaji say, to people who are deeply in grief, try not to do that. You'll pull that person down. Remember that person kindly, and remember their qualities, and wherever they are, may they be happy. And that's always seemed a wonderful completion of the circle of Vipassana. Vipassana, I think I write in the book, it can be perceived as a selfish practice. It is a selfish practice, but Goenkaji explains, until you've got some control and some purity in yourself, some sort of process, you're not really worthy of being able to share with others. A blind person can't lead the blind, that sort of thing. And so, do some of this work, and then you're in a position to really send the metta, which is not just part of a ritual. It's a completion of the experience.
Yeah, and I think we do often forget to send metta to ourselves. Do you make that part of your practice as well?
I do. Particularly, if I've messed up, which I do.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm quite far on in the aging process, and so I'm more appreciative of time passing. I'm making good use of it, and I try and share that with servers on courses. Because that's really the vehicle for service. But it's difficult. Often people who serve, like on courses, they've only sat maybe one or two courses. They have the volition. That's a wonderful thing. They want to volunteer to help other people get this wonderful technique. But then, the problem comes that when you serve, you're also sitting your own course. And that can be very difficult. So, but it's a wonderful learning experience, serving a course particularly. Because you're privileged to see some of the struggles that students go through, and the crises. Perhaps you might hear about some of the crises. Nothing weird or wonderful. Just general things, and mainly people come through them. So it's fantastic, and they all have a part to play in them. Nothing like it.
Yeah, it's really special to serve.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a section that I wanted to get to as well about this. This can also relate to serving in a sense, where he's talking about a description of how he's applying it in daily life, and it's particularly nice, very specific one. It's on page 58, and it's by Ron Thompson from New Zealand. Starts with, "My friends had thought it funny."
My friends had thought it funny that I, an incessant talker, was going to be silent for 10 days. In fact, this was not a difficulty. On the 10th day of the course, we were allowed to talk. When I discussed the course with other students, I was surprised to discover that the subtle body sensations were present all the time, without any effort on my part. In rapid succession, I was confronted by the effects of certain habits that I developed and which I had varying degrees of awareness of before. When I interrupted someone, I had one sensation. When I had critical thoughts about what someone was saying, I had another. And when I talked too much without being sensitive to others, a third body sensation occurred. These were rapidly established as reliable indicators, and before long, I was able to stop myself whenever I began to do these things.
This is great. But it's wonderful description of how it can be very tangible and concrete like that.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk about this impacting your life decisions, or how, the sensations have sort of guided you through life.
Well, they do. Yeah, they do. I can think of extreme situations where there was the potential for something going badly wrong, like with my Sheila or something like that, and I felt physically sick, and I just I took evasive action immediately. More and more the more you meditate, in my experience, the more your sensations are your guide. And, as many people have said, if you've got a tricky decision, don't make it, keep sitting. And you're in the middle of your sitting, plop, the answer comes down the chute. And you didn't do anything. You just had enough clarity, and you were slowed up to be able to listen to the Dhamma inside you. And yeah, so when you're craving, you feel it. When you're feeling fearful, you feel it, or you can feel it. As you say, sometimes you're just overwhelmed with ignorance, and you miss it, and then you mess up. But yeah, no, sensations and the breath. You've got those 2 alarm systems established the more you meditate, and they really, really help in everyday life. And that's the wonder of this technique. It takes us back to that one-liner from the Buddha, doesn't it? Every thought in the mind, or emotion, or memory, flows along with the sensation in the body. That is just such an amazing, enlightened insight.
Yeah, it somehow guides us towards what we need to do at that time. Yeah, there's another really beautiful story I'm hoping you can read. This one's a little longer one, but I loved it so much. I'm hoping we can read it. It starts on page 69. I'm going to just have you read a section of it.
Okay.
It's by turn. Starts with "In the summer of 1995."
Yeah, this is a very dramatic account. I'm so glad that Turn, who I know well now, I've got to know well in Dhamma. I'm so glad that you were mentioning honesty, that he should recount this to share with others, because it is very dramatic. And his response, if he'd been a non-meditator, his response to what happened to him could have been so much different. In the summer of 1995, I flew to Bangkok to start a 2-month trip through southern Thailand, Malaysia, and Sumatra, after which I'd returned to Thailand to sit my second Vipassana course at Dhammakamala just before returning to Holland. But after 6.5 weeks of traveling and feeling very open towards everyone I met, my trip came to a premature and most unexpected close. One morning in Sumatra, I went for a walk after meditating. I was joined by 3 Indonesian young men who socialized a bit, asking me for my name and origin. They walked along with me until we had left the village far enough behind, and then I wondered why my head was exploding. I couldn't see anything anymore, and just felt very intense sensations on my head. When I got my sight back, I saw that the 3 had spread out, and that one of them had hit me on the head with a big stick he had picked up. Then I realized I was being robbed. They beat me some more, and after frightening minutes, my hands and feet were tied. Bleeding heavily, I was put in the bushes beside the road. Then they left. For a brief moment, I accepted the fact that this was the moment I would die. But then there was a very strong push, an impulse from within, which made me continue. I realized that my head wound needed treatment rapidly, and also that my attackers could still come back. And at that very moment, when I could have been completely absorbed by the situation, something happened which gave me a moment of rest at a time I needed it most. I untied my hands and feet, and for a short time, I just sat there beside that road, practicing Vipassana. I was aware of the sensations on my body and maintained equanimity towards them, realizing they were just arising and passing away. I understood that though the sensations were intense, they wouldn't last forever, and this allowed me to observe them instead of being overpowered by them. After a while, I started moving and thinking of ways to solve the troublesome situation I was in. I was found by other travellers who helped me most wonderfully, and I was repatriated to Holland where I could recover. When those people had found me, one of them started cursing the boys, but the practice of Vipassana enabled me to feel nothing but sincere compassion for them. Their lives must be full of negativity, aggression and greed, and I felt really sorry for them. What they did was absolutely wrong, and if possible, I thought they should be punished for their deeds. Yet I was aware that by feeling hatred towards them, I would also be full of negativity, which would definitely not help me at this time, when I needed all my energy to bring the situation to a good end. Of course, back home, aggression came, hatred came, desire for revenge came, rage came, sadness came. I'm definitely not an enlightened person. But still, all this time, there were moments of equanimity, of facing the situation with a balanced mind. And these moments have been so helpful, they're invaluable. Now, with psychiatric treatment, I had to work for a year or more to be freed from the stress and the problems I had generated in reaction to this robbery. I can only imagine how much more time and effort it would have cost me had I not been supported by Vipassana. At times in this first year, after the robbery, it was too hard to meditate, even Anapana. Yet the fact that the meditation had been so incredibly helpful and the results so enormous after only one course and half a year of regular practice, this ensured that I would come back to it. When the time was right, I sat a second course. When the retreat was over, a fellow student asked me what kind of results I was getting so far. I answered him in vague, broad terms that it was helping me in various ways. He somehow kept coming back to this question, and I kept avoiding a specific answer. Just before the last day was over and we were all going to bed, he asked me, "Okay, just give me one example of a situation in which Vipassana has been beneficial to you." I then told him this story, and he understood the source of my inspiration.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful at the end how he was hesitant to say, to tell the story, and then how he suddenly plunges in and decides to relate this to that other student.
You know what?
Mm.
While I was researching this, another student told almost exactly the same story, located in the same place. So common karma somehow.
Yeah. The other part that I found really human and also inspiring, because it's so honest, is the part where he says, of course, back home, aggression came, hatred came, desire for revenge came, rage came, sadness came. I'm definitely not an enlightened person. But still, all this time, there were moments of equanimity, of facing the situation with a balanced mind. And these moments have been so helpful. They are invaluable. And we hear this a lot throughout the book, that we get these moments of strong awareness, but then we're flooded with our more usual reactive mind. But then these moments start to build, and then we start to suddenly, not suddenly, but slowly start to see the change in our lives. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this, how Vipassana or Anapana quickly came to your aid, or if you've seen this in others, in other stories.
I suppose the standout thing that comes to mind, in my personal life, I had a very easy ride for a long time. I didn't have any major, problems. And then suddenly, as happens in life, things just got totally, got totally overturned. So I'd been meditating for some time, but it had never really been tested, if you like, in that sort of situation. Both my parents died within a week of each other, and I was in my what was I? I was in my 30s at the time, or no, 40s, early 40s. But still, it came as a shock. My mother had been ill for had a short illness, but my father was sort of out of the blue, and he died first. And so that was really quite something to come to terms with and sort of continue. But things weren't done then. My wife at that time, my first wife, suddenly got sick, and she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so within 10 months, all three of those key people were out of the picture. And but I had, I kept my sitting going. I sort of could see what was happening. There was a major rewriting of the script going on. And
what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
My life script was being rewritten. We think we control our lives. Do we really? So obviously not. So I just hung in there. I had lots of support from meditators and family and non-meditators. and it was fine. I had the experience of, caring for, my sick wife, and we got closer as the time for separation came closer. And she was a non-meditator. She tried to come on a course, but there were very early courses in the UK, quite rough. She was a great skeptic, a bit of a feisty character, and it didn't work, as happens sometimes. But actually, in those last months, we were starting to meditate together.
Mm.
She could see it. She changed a lot inside herself, and it was the circle came together at that time. That was great. And so, in a scenario where without Vipassana, who knows, how you would have fallen apart, and when you're tested that severely, it obviously strengthens your confidence in the technique. Ego doesn't come into it. You can't do this. You can't ride these waves. But if you can see the suffering for what it is, that's arising and passing. A few months before, none of this was going on, and then suddenly you're in this tsunami, and it's trying to sweep you away, and you just go with it as best you can, and keep sitting, and keep linking in, connecting with your support systems and so on. It washes through, and so it happened, and I came out of that, and I had the good fortune then to be able to take early retirement from my work and start giving more service. And it turned out fine. So, yes.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I wondered, this might be an interesting moment to talk. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, using your practice to raise a child. Your father, you and Shalina have a son. I wondered, just how did you make use of your practice in raising your child?
We kept practicing. Jay, our son, who's now 21, he's not at home anymore. He's living and working independently in the local city. And he's, of his own volition, he's taken a couple of Vipassana courses. He doesn't practice all the time, but it's always there for him, and he knows that, and it does help. Another Dhamma friend talks about children as pets, parental equanimity testers. So that's very true in my experience. You learn an awful lot. It's sometimes meditators feel that there's a tension between your own development and Dhamma service and having children.
Mm-hmm.
I also might have felt that way before I'd been down this route, but actually, having had the experience, I don't think so at all. Having a family is service. Goenkaji, had a massive family. His advice to meditators always: family comes first. Don't be conflicted about that. Just keep your sitting going. there's a lovely, I think in the children's chapter of the book, there's a lovely thing by a Japanese friend of ours who, talking about bringing up a very young child and the child meditating in her lap, the child lying in her lap while she meditated. Yeah, it can be tough, particularly with young children and for mothers in particular who are so close to the growing child. Not finding time to meditate even daily. You have to be ingenious about it. You have to get to know how to do it. Of course, you're going to be tired. A lot of extra stress. You can't go and sit your courses. When you talk about applications, that is the everyday application.
Right.
And to feel that, having a child, you're not only giving a being a chance to come into this world and to have this additional gift of Vipassana, which is their choice. Who knows whether this person will be interested in taking this seed, whether there's a sapling growing already. That's not in our control.
Okay, great. I wanted to close with a beautiful piece of writing on page 195 by Yotaro Ota.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be a nice one to end with. It starts with the day's sitting came to an end.
The day's sitting came to an end. I went out to the garden. There were already plenty of dewdrops on the grass. A sky full of stars was twinkling and sparkling. The Milky Way was clear in sight. Cassiopeia, Pleiades, Cygnus, and other constellations were traced. I realized through the world of sensations I was feeling that my body was void and gaseous, just like the spacious sky, where countless stars were sparkling and moving so rapidly. My body felt solid and tangible, but the fact was that it was gaseous and empty. It might be mine, and it might not. Who was this I? Suddenly it occurred to me that I'd always been so selfish and egotistical up until this moment. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I cried out loud, not for sorrow, but for inexplicable joy. At least, at that moment, I was humble enough to thank everyone and everything. Lying down on the log bench, I looked up at the sky again. The whole universe was a vivid organic entity now. I could even sense it was revolving very slowly. The starry sky up there and the starry universe inside of me that I glimpsed a short while ago in meditation were beautifully resonating. I felt so assured and secure, happy and content. Martha, that reminds me of a story Goenkaji tells towards the end of an old student course about that experience of looking up at the stars to place yourself. Who am I? Am I so important? Look at those stars, light years away. And this small being on this small planet. And, that sort of apparent irony of insignificance on the one hand, and yet I have this Dhamma. I'm also a light with this in this small place. And like U Ba Khin said, light in one person can spread to light to others. This is our gift.
I just wanted to thank you for writing this book, for putting it together, for pulling all these different pieces together. And I'm sure it's helped many students and will continue to do so for many years to come.
It's been its own reward. And I'm so pleased that Pariyatti, has taken the initiative to invite, books as one technology, but using video presentations and so on, so that other people who might have stories. I've seen the couple of stories that the interviews that you've had recently, and they're quite extreme stories, but it's an extreme world, and for people to be able to bear witness to how Vipassana can help in those stories. I mean, we've had, Turn and other people's stories, Charlie Brown's story there. They are, these things happen, fact is stranger than fiction sometimes, isn't it? So that's a great initiative. And let's hope other people will not be shy and feel confident enough to share these things if they think that other people can benefit.
Thank you so much again. And now we have some time to take some questions from the audience. Let's see if we can make some time for that.
Very good. Okay.
So one of the questions here is, I have a question concerning practice and pregnancy. I'm pregnant currently at the 9th month, and it hasn't been an easy period at all from a physical point of view. Before pregnancy, it was difficult. I would miss my practice. But as I became pregnant and I could not feel well throughout it, maintaining daily practice seemed impossible, especially on certain difficult days. Any suggestions about it and how to deal with this kind of situation in life?
Very difficult, very practical problem. Your goal, hopefully, your meditation will have taught you this, is don't get upset. Whatever you do, don't get upset, because if you get upset, the baby will get upset. So it's easy to say, isn't it? Particularly from a male point of view. We don't have that. Yeah, we're just onlookers at that point. Yes, particularly if you're used to having a regular daily practice and suddenly it's all gone haywire. So do your best and be happy with that. You have to accept this is a very special situation that you're in. If you can't work with sensation in the normal way, going through the body, then you have anapana. If you can't practice, or if you want to work with sensation, but you don't want to work through the whole body, you've got the extremities to work on sometime with equanimity. You might not be able to, you might be used to being able to practice an hour at a time undisturbed. This is a time that you can learn that it's fine to practice in short bursts and get what you can where you can. This will be the same when the child is first born. That was certainly our experience. And then metta, as we've been listening just now, to yourself and to the unborn child. It should be fine, but don't worry about it. That will just add to your burden in what is going to be a wonderful and joyous experience for you.
Okay, great. There's another one here from an audience member. Marta mentioned the Buddha cutting the lotus leaf, and I was struck by my reticence of reading outside of information presented outside of Goenkaji's words. I do read extensively, but I feel a disloyalty at times. Is this common as a student?
Hard to know whether it's common. I've certainly heard it. I think the problem goes away as you develop confidence in the technique. That's the main thing. Goenkaji on day 11 of the 10-day course says, if there's anything that you've heard in my explanations of theory that doesn't accord with your understanding or your experience today, just put it aside. It doesn't matter. It's the practice that matters, and that will give results. So there is that. Goenkaji, in his discourses and so on, and following the instructions, actually, he's following directly the teaching of the Buddha. He has his own way of explaining things for the modern generation, which is very helpful. He goes into some details which you might not find in the Buddha's teaching, but they're things that he has experienced. He's found helpful when explaining to non-meditators from different cultures and backgrounds. And of course, he worked with U Ba Khin for so many years, and together, they had a chance to work out how to present Vipassana for the modern era. So I think with the teaching of the Buddha, one should try to be open-minded about everything. After all, this is not a cult. It's not narrow in this way. You take a course, you give it a trial, and then the trial continues for some time until you're ready to commit to this technique. But it doesn't mean that you can't listen to other people's presentations of the teaching of the Buddha and so on. Everything that we do as meditators should be done with discriminatory intelligence in a balanced way. That was what the Buddha was saying to the Kalamas. Just because I say this, just because the tradition says this, just because your peer group says this or will accept this, don't accept until you have experienced that it works for you. And this is what we do. This is the scientific basis of Vipassana. We test what we're being told in our own experience, in the course and after the course. Does it work for us? Don't accept until you're convinced yourself.
Okay, and maybe they're also asking about reading the direct words of the Buddha, directly from the suttas. Do you want to
Wonderful.
talk about that?
Wonderful. Yes. So, if you get the opportunity and you're interested, there are so many facilities now, including run by Pariyatti, of Pāli study. But even before you get to that point, if you're interested to know the source of various things, you can go to the transcripts of the 10-day course, or you can go to translations of the morning chantings, where you see how Goenkaji is actually inserting the Buddha's teaching at certain points in the course, which are appropriate.
Okay, great. Okay, so another question here is, how can experienced non-AT students on the path help younger, newer in terms of practice students see the benefits of commitment to regular practice, but not get carried away into the rigor of the practice that can in turn affect their lay lives negatively?
Well, it is important to get established in your daily practice, and this is one of the big issues for people, particularly after the first course. Goenkaji gives lots of advice about that. Choose a certain place in your house, choose a certain time, and try and stick to it. Now, he recommends an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. I would also recommend that, but I also know that I would not have been able to do that. When I got back from my travels and I was in a busy professional life. And I hear that from so many other Western students also. So my personal advice would be set a realistic goal and stick to that. So it might even be just half an hour a day, morning or evening, but do it. Do it, and do it because you will then see the benefits of the practice, and then improve. Take time out of your sleep, take time out of being on the smartphone, and stick to it. It will pay you wonderful dividends. And morning and evening is very important. So whatever time you give it in that way. Friends on the path are very important. Constructive advice from friends would be, well, if you're struggling, being in your own apartment or whatever, and trying to keep your sitting together, well, come to the local group sitting, and we'll have a cup of tea afterwards. Now we have online group sittings. We have mobile apps where we can access so much material of inspiration, and group sittings, discourses, etc., etc. Lots of things. Have you tried serving? Even if not for a full 10-day course, then go to the center and offer some service. They always need volunteer help. All these things actually strengthen the newcomer particularly. But don't force. Forcing is not right in Dhamma.
Any practical advice on taking time off from the smartphone?
Yeah, the best advice is what happens on courses. You lock it away. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's our modern addiction, isn't it?
Okay. Here's another one. Thank you for your insightful experience of realizing change. In your practice, when your sensations start arising and then passing away, how would you accept there is no thinker, you, only thought sensation? By accepting the impermanence of existence through sensations, how would you explain the concept of physical and mental existence through the 5 khandhas, aggregates?
Well, scholars might have one response, but I'm not a scholar. I've just had the good fortune of practicing this for some time in this life. So actually, my response is actually to do with realizing change, meaning the direct experience of this via the sensations, the understanding of the arising and passing in my own experience as continuously as possible, and then through the development of equanimity, through non-reaction, little by little, a progressive liberation. Those are the 3 bits of realizing change that it took me a long time to understand, and it comes in the final chapter. But I hadn't pieced it together till about 5 years after I started.
Okay, great. Can you say the 3 one more time?
Yeah. So realizing change, first of all, direct experience of change inside yourself as well as out in the world through observation of the sensations arising and passing, understanding the process and its impersonal nature and the nature of suffering and why we practice this equanimity, why it's so important to our practice, and finally that without any effort this will progressively liberate. It's not a matter of ego, it's part of the law of nature. It will happen little by little. The more you try, the further you'll go in the other direction, as we heard from Tanda.
Okay. Another question from the audience. My sensations don't stop even though I come out of practice. For instance, recently I had painful sensations for more than 40 days. Extremely challenging to earn a living with that. Any advice on how to deal with that?
Yes. Worrying report that something's not right to me there. So my suggestion is contact your nearest Vipassana center and speak to an assistant teacher about your experience. I don't know whether it was because you'd done a course as a result of that, or whether it's in your daily practice. It might have something to do with a medical condition. Whatever it is, it needs following up, because, as you say, I mean, we offer these courses so that people can get a practical toolkit to help them in their lives. But if actually you're getting very strong reactions of that kind, which are negatively affecting your everyday life, then it needs straightening out. Good luck with that.
Okay, another question. I live in a place where there's no group which practices regular Vipassana. I do meditate regularly in the morning, but in the evening it is not consistent. How do I tackle this problem? I also want to be part of a group which sits sometimes together for meditation.
Well, there are a few bits to that. I probably won't remember all of them. What sort of sticks in my mind is you have to try to develop the strength to sit by yourself sometimes. I mean, even to the extent of sitting an odd day by yourself. You can do that easily. And maybe, who knows, sometime you might have to sit a full 10 days by yourself. But try to develop the strength in yourself to do that. Otherwise, group sittings and so on are helpful. You can use the taped material, the audio material, whatever, to help you if you're by yourself, if you feel you need some inspiration, and you don't just want to sit in silence.
Okay, great. And did you want to address the question about having trouble getting that evening sit in? Being consistent in the morning, but having trouble with the evening. Any practical tips on that for people?
Well, if you've had a hard day's work and perhaps you're coming back to a family situation where you've got responsibilities, it can be hard. Things do change, and work responsibilities might change, or your hours at work might change, or the demands of the family might change. We have to be flexible. We don't live in an ideal world. We have to get our Dhamma, as best we can. So say evening is difficult. Okay, so maybe sit a bit more in the morning. It's not ideal, but it's better than not getting a sit in the evening or getting you 2 hours. So just see what works for you, but keep sitting, and keep sitting properly. You'll get the results.
Yeah, I had a friend who used to sit at work before she went home, which helped her establish her practice. She was a teacher, so she could find an empty classroom, sit, and then go home for the family responsibilities. So,
all right. Nice. Yeah.
So what are some setbacks a meditator might face? You mentioned this. Can you give some examples? How can we be sure we will keep getting up and moving forward on the path?
The setbacks. Yes. So we get to the 5 enemies, the hindrances in action when we're sitting a course or even in everyday life. So cravings, aversions, agitation, guilt, laziness, doubt. When we're in the course, I'm craving because I can't, Goenkaji is already giving an instruction and I'm not at that stage in the course. And I'm craving. I want to be, ahead of the game, ahead of the class, and I'm falling behind the class. Or craving for the final goal. Oh, I feel such pleasant sensations. I must be close to nirvana now. Whether or not you are or not, you're craving. Aversion Well, it might be at a physical level. I'm feeling so much pain I can't deal with it. It could be emotions and thoughts overpowering. These are things that people often have to face in courses and outside courses. And it takes time to understand how our equanimity towards the sensations can help us. For instance, not rolling in the thoughts and the emotions as they come, but working indirectly with them through the sensations on the body. This is very helpful.
Okay, great. Well, here's another one from the audience. Can you speak to the seeming contradiction between making no effort and the effort we do make in our practice? That's a good question.
It's a seeming contradiction. All we have to do really is turn up. Turn up mindfully, be on the cushion. Know that it's going to be an hour or a little bit longer if you're sending metta. And whatever happens, I'm going to be here. And remind yourself what the job is. I'm observing sensations, I'm observing the breath, I'm working, to come out of craving, aversion, ignorance. What's it going to be today? I'm not looking for pleasant sensations, unpleasant sensations. It is a reflection of what's going on in my mind in the main. So it's a voyage of discovery. And you face it with a balanced mind, and you'll be fresher and better for it.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes left, but let's see if we can squeeze in this last question from the audience. I'm a student of Vipassana. Sometimes I don't get the time to sit, so I try to be aware of all my activities with awareness. Is that okay?
It's good, but it's not enough. And it has its own dangers, as Goenkaji says in the discourses. Be careful. You might, while you're observing the sensations, you're driving your car, you're not aware that you're driving off the road. So, yeah, be careful about that. Of course, being aware of what you do has its own benefits, but being with the sensations and their changing nature is the essence of what we're doing. So it's not a substitute for your daily sitting. That's critically important. The two things will help each other naturally.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much for your time, Ian. Looks like we're close to the end here, and I don't want to go over too much. So thanks for the.
I'd like just perhaps to say a word of thank you to all the contributors, 160 odd people who contributed their stories, all the helpers for this project, and may our merits be shared.
Wonderful. And thanks for the Chandra and Tina for your tech support.
Thank you so much, Ian and Marta, for joining us today. And on behalf of Pariyatti, I'd also like to thank all of you for attending this event. As a small, resource-limited nonprofit organization, we rely on volunteers to help us wherever possible. And today's event would not have been possible without the generous support of Tina Savla and Chandra Gupta. So thanks again for your help. As always, it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Bye. All the best.